Hello and welcome to this episode of the podcast for the Eastbourne Literary Festival, the festival whose mission is to convince you that you are a writer. I'm Russ Miles, a local writer, listener and festival instigator, and in this podcast I'll be chatting to many diverse and interesting writers about how they write to inspire you to pick up the pen, keyboard or even your phone and start writing. Today we are joined by Julia Raeside, who has been avidly and busily promoting her brilliant, funny and incredibly timely debut novel, Don't Make Me Laugh. As well as now being a best-selling novelist, Julia Raeside is a journalist, broadcaster, and she's written for The Guardian, The Times, Observer, The Big Issue, amongst many others. She makes regular contributions to BBC Radio, including review spots on Radio 4's Front Row and Laverne's Six Music Show. Julia, welcome to our show.
Thank you for having me. It's nice to be here.
It's such a pleasure to have you here. The story of how we encountered your book actually began at the beginning of our festival's life, because it was one of those books that was being put out there, just beginning to be teased when we were beginning to plan this festival. And I remember sitting there looking at an interview, I think, that was with you at the time, thinking, oh no, we've made it when we're talking to Julia.
Oh, come on.
This is the culmination of a dream. I am not lying at all. It's absolutely
no pressure.
True. No pressure at all. The bar is incredibly low, so don't worry. But your book, it is fair to say, has made quite a storm. And I think its topic matter has, and even more importantly, I think from a writer's perspective, the way it's written is so approachable and fun for an incredibly difficult subject. It's an entertaining read as well as delivering a really strong message. In all of the activity that you've had to be involved in that goes into promoting a book of this sort, what's the most surprising reaction that you've had to your debut novel through all that experience?
I don't know if I should say, but I kind of want to say. I won't use any names, but I've done a few radio interviews and I was booked for one around the week the book came out and I was all set to go. It was a radio show presented by a comedian, and I think I sort of got the impression that maybe, I was his producer's booking because they thought, he does comedy, she's written a book about comedy, let's put them together. And I think when the comedian realised what the book was about, he changed his mind. And he said he didn't want to talk about it on air because it made him feel a bit uncomfortable. And I suppose not surprised, but I was a bit disappointed because I just thought, and just to be clear, he wasn't somebody I'd heard about as like being a troublesome person in comedy. He's just a perfectly nice comedian who does a radio show, but he clearly felt really weird about, talking about a subject when I think he works in the industry, it's male dominated. He didn't want to be one of those squeaky wheels kind of making a noise about something, because that's how comedy is. It's a boys' club. And even the nice guys are a bit like, oh, it's not really my problem. Do I have to talk about it? And that was, my jaw was on the floor. It really was. Because I just thought, what, for 5 minutes on a radio show, you can't say interesting story or yes, it appears to be a problem in the industry. He just didn't want to go there. So yeah, I was quite surprised.
I can only imagine as your first, and that was your first promotional activity for the book as well.
Well, I was booked to do a few things and that was just that one that came back and it was like, okay, that's interesting. And I have to say, just because I feel like I want to, there's been some amazing responses from men in comedy, which, I thought the women would be on the front foot because this is something they talk about anyway. But comedians like Ed Gamble, Robin Ince, Richard Herring, they've kind of been really keen to talk about this, which I think fair play to them, because there's clearly, as just evinced by that example, there's clearly some unease about this subject among just the men in general, because I don't know, they feel like they're putting their heads above the parapet if they start talking about it. But how interesting. It's only a book, guys. It's just a made-up story. Relax.
And that's the thing, it's actually a novel. It's not someone who's written an expose of the world or anything like that. It's a wonderful fiction, but it clearly exposes an underbelly of something that's got enough tendrils, perhaps, into real life that it does make people feel uncomfortable if they join you on the platform, perhaps, is one of the ways I think. That, I can see people being hesitant. I can see that, being empathetic with them, perhaps, maybe more than everyone deserves, but I can sort of see the question mark. But I have to admit, I think it's surprising to not make that step.
Yeah. I think so. It's almost like I understand in general how, and we'll talk obviously more about the contents of the book, but how when an industry like comedy, which is so riddled with awful behaviour and unchecked bad behaviour, I can understand how perhaps just in a green room or at a venue they don't want to bring the subject up. But when you're given the opportunity to talk about it in a nice, safe radio studio, you know, no names, no pat drill, it's surprising then not to take the opportunity, I think. And disappointing.
I can see that.
Yeah.
It is. And I think I've been disappointing myself. I've gone straight into this, assuming that everyone has read your book, because that's where I'm at. But I would love that. I think, again, I'm going to put you on the spot. I'm sure you've had to do this a few dozen times by now to explain the general plot of the book, and really, actually it'd be interesting to add on to an explanation of the book, why you felt you needed to write this at this time. What prompted you to make this your first debut novel?
Well, I suppose so. The book is about a radio producer called Ali. We meet her on her 40th birthday. She's having the worst day ever, never mind the worst birthday ever. And she is sent to a comedy club to recruit this famous comedian to present the weekend breakfast show at the radio station where she works. And when she gets there and meets him, it turns out maybe there's a bit of a Me Too situation with him, and another comedian advises her not to book him, basically. And so she ends up kind of even more depressed than when she started, and she meets this guy in the bar, and he's a comedian too, but he's lovely and he's sympathetic, and he gives her loads of attention, and he listens to her troubles. You know, her dad's died, she's really sad, and he kind of just locks into her and seems to take a great interest in her. Even offers to present the radio show. He's famous enough so he could take that, even that problem off her list. So they kind of develop this quite intense friendship. And while that's all kind of bubbling under, Ali begins to meet, so Ali is the name of the heroine, she begins to meet all these other people in the comedy industry. And the further in she gets, the more she realises there's a problem in comedy, and the women are all talking about it and the men really aren't talking about it. And then there's a group called the Scold's Bridal, who are a sort of like, I've now decided this is terrible, but they are basically, have you ever watched Allo Allo? So they're the French resistance, basically. It's a group of women, activists, women underground, you know, they come out in darkness and they don't wear macs and berets, but essentially that. And they are determined that their industry needs to change, and they're going to be the ones to push that to happen. So she starts to get really into the world of comedy. It all culminates, I won't sort of tell you what happens, but it all culminates at the Edinburgh Festival, which is obviously comedy every year. The whole industry pretty much goes up to Edinburgh for the month of August, and that is where the Scold's Bridal decide to make their point. So Ali kind of gets swept up in all of that. But it's essentially a journey about, as well as using this backdrop and the problems that are in it, it's a story about a woman who doesn't really trust other women, who learns that the solidarity of women is like the greatest superpower we have, especially in an industry like comedy where, you know, the boys' club persists. So it's kind of there's a central story about Ali, and the backdrop is the murky world of comedy, which is definitely based on real stories that I've heard. I
would love to dig into research around this, and I know that there's probably areas that we can't go into because there are people who've shared stories that you've done a really successful job of wrapping into fiction.
Thank you.
But there is a couple of things I'd love to talk about, particularly around the characters that you have in the book, because a lot of the novels that we've interviewed people for over the podcast, the characters are so strong in some of these books, begin to desperately care about them. And what struck me, so I'm a father, and of a 15-year-old girl turning 16 1 week today, in fact. Yes, interesting times.
Isn't it though? I've got a 15, nearly 16-year-old. It's fun, isn't it?
It's fun with an interesting amount of quote marks around it.
Yep. Yeah.
So, yes, but it's sort of a parent's nightmare is to think of their son or daughter going through the sort of predatory experience but what you do is you bring it in such a way in the book that you don't just care about the lead character and then there's this demon or this enemy. You also bring a depth to the antagonist, shall we say, in the piece.
Yeah.
And you also bring, I think, a very strong charm side to your antagonist. You show wonderfully how somebody, even in the very first scenes where you do have in your mind, this doesn't feel quite right, but your antagonist is so charming and so there and so complete for Ali.
Yeah.
When you were writing that, I have to talk a little bit about the research.
Yeah.
You don't have to go there if any of this steps over the line, but how did you get it so real? Is it something that came from a specific story or a merger of stories or your own experiences to come up with that incredibly complex scenario that is built into a very short introduction, really?
Yeah. Well, I'm really glad that that's the way it worked for you reading it, because I think I was almost determined to, although you are feeling uneasy and the branding, everything tells you this is not going to be a love story of that sort. But I wanted the rom-com kind of thing to be at the front when I started, because I sort of wanted the reader to ever so slightly fancy Ed, if possible, or even if you're not sort of physically attracted to male comedians in their early 40s, just to kind of feel that charm, that kind of charm offensive that he goes on. So I think I started with, I mean, obviously just lots of anecdotal stuff, women I'd spoken to, friends I'd spoken to who'd been in relationships with comedians. Not all comedians, like some were just like friends who'd been in coercive relationships or relationships with people who were charming but ultimately awful, or it really was like a lot of stories feeding into one story. But I think going back over my own like relationship history, so I'm lucky I've been like married since I was 30, and he's like nice. He's not one of these guys, but I definitely, oh God, I mean, the car crash that was my 20s, I think I probably had, if not like relationships, situations with some men who were a bit like this. And so there was some personal experience in there too, for sure. But I think the specific, like almost the toolbox of the comedian, I heard some pretty eye-raising stories, and I kind of, lots of that fed into the final character of Ed. But I think the story that I heard the most, and obviously there are ghastly things going on in comedy, there are men assaulting women and giving them lifts home and inviting them to stay on the sofa after a late gig and stuff, and then doing dreadful things. But there are also these other kinds of men who are sort of, they know where the legal line is. They'd never do anything illegal. They're not stupid, but it's very much at the front of their mind. What can they do up to that line? And so it kind of comes from a place of wanting to manipulate and control women, because that's kind of the kick they're looking for. It's not really about, being rock and roll and having lots of sex with fans, because they could do that if they wanted to. But they sort of do this thing. I mean, you keep hearing it described in the media, the Andrew Tate sort of model, where you kind of, you basically tell someone you're disarmed by them to the point where you've just completely fallen in love with them. And it all goes a bit too fast. It's love bombing at the start where they're just incredibly nice to you. And I kept hearing about this again and again. And what that sort of love bombing led to was this pattern of control. And the internet's kind of even made it easier for them now, because comedians going on tour, go from town to town. You can sort of do that, in person. But now with social media, they can control women from hundreds of miles away if they want to. And there's a very specific power imbalance in, the guy on stage with the microphone. I think I sort of say in the book, he doesn't look like much. And if you passed him in the street, you just, you wouldn't turn your head and go, who is that guy? But on stage, that persona, that kind of slightly grandiose, the guy's in charge of the room, that obviously makes a lot of people weak at the knees. It just does. The power is attractive, but they use that power sometimes off stage as well as on, and that need to control the room sometimes goes off stage too. And the stories I heard, there were so many like that. I was like, that's what I want to write about. Illegal stuff, not people assaulting people. Why are they doing that? What is that need for control? And so I suppose Ed it's probably a tiny bit of personal experience, remembering, the nonsense I used to put up with when I was younger. And then so many stories from women I know now. Yeah.
How did you approach getting into Ed's head? Not to be too rhyming, but because he's a complex character, and there are several moments in the book where I found myself, and I know friends who've read the book as well, didn't want him to be what he was becoming.
Yeah.
And could almost wanted to scream at the character, no, don't go there, don't become that.
Yeah.
And because he is charming. He does seem an alternative. I can remember thinking at one point in the book where you've got the person at the beginning, the comedian at the beginning, that is very much the being warned off. Don't sign him up for the deal.
Yes.
And then later on, I found myself wanting him to come back as kind of a surprise antagonist, and it really wasn't Ed. Not Ed. Yeah, exactly. And so,
that's good.
How did you get that into Ed's head? Is that something that you had to consciously do, or was it a beautiful accident? How did that come about?
I mean, he obviously is. I mean, some people who've sort of read the book or reviewed the book have said that there's not many. There's about 2 or 3 chapters where I kind of it's in close third with Ali for most of the time, and then there's a couple of chapters where I've switched that and it's close third with Ed. And I suppose by the time I wrote those, I was sort of thinking, well, I know what he'd do in the situation. I don't necessarily think I did get into his head, because I think the head of someone like that is so complicated. I don't even understand like what motivates them, like what all that admin, I think it's, I've remembered, I'm saying this multiple times when talking to women about men they've had these kind of relationships with. It's like, what? Surely they're tired. Like they're just endlessly kind of trying to remember who they've told what, all the lies they've told. It just sounds exhausting. And so I don't know if I ever truly did get quite inside his head, but I mean, I went for it in a gothic way and just decided, whatever he's presenting, it's a brilliant artifice because he needs to hide what's inside, which is truly dark. And I think when I decided effectively it was kind of a vampire story, because that's fun, right? Who doesn't want to write a gothic story? There's a scene, which I won't spoil, in someone's front room in Northern Ireland. Or in Ireland, there's a scene with a coffin. I'll say no more. And I think actually when I decided who he was, I had it all planned out, and I was like, I'm going to write that scene when I get to it. And I was like, no, I want to write it now. So I kind of dropped the boring bit I was doing and raced forward and wrote that just to see what he was like. And I really enjoyed that. And I think that's probably when it all started to kind of catch fire a bit for me, because I was just sort of impatient to see how awful I could make him. The answer is really awful.
You have done, without a doubt. And as you mentioned that scene in the book, I've got little flashes going through my mind going, oh my goodness, yes, that one. And in fact, there's 2 scenes in the book that really are so well written that you do feel scared.
Oh, good.
Or at least I did.
Yeah.
Others may feel many more, but I certainly had 2. Bearing in mind, when I read the book, I was very comfortable coming back from Paris on the Eurostar.
How nice. I love my book is so much better travelled than I am. It's amazing.
It's been to Saint-Germain-des-Prés. We sat there in the Café de Flore reading it.
Very nice.
So yeah, it was wonderfully apt. But there was that scene, the additional scene that completely terrified me, which was the Arthur's Seat.
Yes.
Scene.
Yes.
That is brilliant tension that builds up, because you literally sit there going, something could happen here.
Yeah.
And it could be ultimately catastrophic for one or more of the characters, the people in the book.
Yeah.
When did you write that scene? When did that come to mind? Was it late in the process or early? How was it for you?
I wrote that. It wasn't in maybe the first couple of drafts. There was it's sort of we won't spoil it by saying it, there's a kind of confrontation. And for about the first 2 or maybe even more drafts, that was just somewhere random, like a park. I can't remember. I didn't really know where to set it. And, just thought, they'll put it in Regent's Park. I don't know. Something will come up. And then eventually, obviously, this is what I didn't understand about writing, that I just assumed those things are locked in at the beginning. Like, here's my plot. This happens. That came to me because I'd realised, without even realising, I'd been setting it up for the whole book. And I was like, hang on a minute. She's scared of heights. They need to be somewhere. Oh, I'm such an idiot. I hadn't, it sounds bad to think it now, but it wasn't there and it didn't happen that way. So I think maybe about, sort of 3rd or 4th draft, I was like, oh, this is, again, it's sort of really flying. It's taking shape now. It had a proper tension to it. And I wrote that. I keep calling them scenes because I can't think of any other way to describe them. But I wrote that scene. I overwrote it massively. And then eventually when, so my book was bought by a small indie publisher, brilliant indie publisher called Bedford Square. So my editor wasn't like the person who bought the book. Like the guy who owns the company said, we'll have your book. They then found me this editor who actually is in Edinburgh herself. She lives up there. And when she read that scene, she was like, not that, not that, not that, and just cut it down to almost, well, to what it is now. And suddenly I was like, of course, yes, that's so much better. So I kind of I'd put in lots of, whoa, is someone going to fall moments? It's like, you don't need them because the tension's just there, isn't it? You kind of, less needed to be said and more just needed to be in the gaps, I suppose. So I loved working with her. She's called Jo Dingley. She used to be a Canongate editor. And she's like, she was on mat leave basically and just tearing through my book. Absolutely brilliant. I just loved her. Absolutely loved her.
I love the point you make there. And let's get into how you write as well now, because that's definitely the theme of the festival, is to try and encourage as many people as possible to think of writing as something they can approach. So when, you've had there an editor that I think has done something that best editors I've ever experienced do, which is they take a lot out and they leave the right gaps.
Yes.
To let other people bring that tension themselves. It's, you can build. I was talking to Luke Chilton not that long ago for the podcast, and he said it's often in what you're not saying where all the tension and imagination is igniting. And great editors, of course, can do that to a novel, which is new to me because I've never written a novel myself. So it was a lovely piece of information. My editors for not sort of technical books and that sort of thing, they're usually just saying, Russ, you're going on too much and just cutting those bits out.
She did that too. A good one can do both.
And they can do it in a way that you agree with. Okay?
Yeah,
so that's,
for sure.
That's awesome. It's a relationship. It's a collaborative relationship, I suspect.
Yeah, for sure.
And so when you were writing across this book, now you've been a contributing writer, working in creative activities for a long time, or perhaps all your career, I'm not sure, but it certainly looks like it from everything you describe in your bio. To then go to a longer form like this, a project that could take some time to produce, did you find that you had to adopt a set of habits, a set of ways of working that were any different from what you've done before? And you mentioned there about scenes and how you're constructing this piece from multiple scenes, which is a phrasing I've heard a few times from novelists. Did you find any of those things were learnings and changed how you wrote at all as you approached this longer form novel?
Yeah, I honestly feel like I hope this doesn't come across as glib, because I really believe this, that I had written before. I was an arts journalist, so I responded to other people's creativity, if you like, but I might as well have been a postman before, because I don't feel like any of the skills really that I use in journalism I used in writing a novel. It was an extraordinary, I don't know what I thought it would be like, but it felt like such a leap compared to what I normally do. So I remember drunkenly going up to someone. I think my husband was doing like a literary festival in London, the Stoke Newington Literary Festival, which is like really good fun. We go every year. And he'd done something to do with a book he'd written. And I was in the green room afterwards, just like, sort of 3 wines in, just having just started writing this book and just grabbing whoever would listen to me. It was really embarrassing because they were probably all novelists. And just saying, oh my God, I've never been creative in my life. This is it. I now know what this is. Because I hadn't done the blank page just like from my head thing. All I ever do is react to other people. When I'm a journalist, it's only reacting to, I don't sit there and, I come up with feature ideas and stuff, but I don't sit there and create a world in my head. And that's what you're effectively doing with a novel. And it did feel like every single thing that I had learned from journalism was kind of redundant, really. It was coming from a different place in my head, like the creative bit of your brain is not the same as the remembering bit, or it felt like I was accessing a whole different part of my head. And yeah, so in terms of writing practice, normally I have a deadline, and because I mostly write for papers, it's like a quick deadline, and it turns out I really need that because, motivating myself is not easy. I'm not brilliantly self-motivated. So yeah, the other thing was to kind of either create false deadlines or to beg friends to help. Like there's a brilliant novelist called Will MacLean who wrote a book, it came out in 2020, called The Apparition Phase, which is genuinely one of the best scary books I've ever read. Yes, he's my friend, but also he's a genius. And his new one is coming out next year, and I think is going to be a bit of a thing. He when I said, right, I'm going to do it, that's one thing I did. I kept telling people, I'm doing it. I'm writing a book. It was almost like telling people you're going to run the marathon. It's like, if you tell people, then you have to do it. And he texted me a good, I'm going to say 3 or 4 weeks. Every single day, he texted me, have you done 1,000 words? Have you done 1,000 words? And honestly, it sounds pathetic, but I needed that. And that kind of got me in the habit of just like, whatever else I'm doing, I can stop and but I have to make sure there's 1,000 new words on that page. So that's how I actually got the first draft done. But obviously before that, I did kind of plot it out on cards and stick it on in fact, I realised halfway through that I was like, I need to get a pin board. I haven't even got one. So then I went to, Wilco's and got a pin board and came back, and great procrastination tool, having to put up a pin board. And yeah, but once I planned it, it was just his constant nagging that got me through the first draft. So I have a lot to thank him for. Yes.
What a boon to have friends like that.
Find a naggy friend. Yeah, for sure. That's my advice. Honestly,
that's perfect.
Yeah, you need accountability. It's like a sponsor. You need someone to go, have you done it? Have you done it? Like your mum, basically.
Have you done your revision? Have you done your
homework? I know, exactly. See, you know that voice. Voice.
So you had Will there in your corner, sort of hitting the drum each day.
Yeah.
And did you have a further group of people around the book? Because the subject is it's fiction, but you're writing about at times extremely difficult experiences and characters. Mm-mm. The one that broke my heart and still breaks my heart when I think about it is Sid, is a character in it. And she is, when anyone ever reads the book, when you're introduced to Sid, her story and everything that goes into that character is absolutely phenomenal.
Oh, thank you.
Did you find that when you're doing this book, which has its fun moments and it's going to have its deep and dark and difficult moments, did you have a support group around you that were rallying there, that you could trust with? We actually had Holly Seddon on a previous episode.
Yes, yeah.
And she talked about how she has a small group of people to run ideas past, because ideas are so fragile that if they're received by people that she perhaps couldn't listen to as well or couldn't take something from, they could be killed so easily.
Really easily, yeah.
Yeah. Did you have that sort of different rings of fellowship around your particular book? How did that work for you?
Yeah, no, I did. I mean, I'm, again, really lucky that obviously the one thing about being, I think I'm probably a bit older than a lot of debuts. I'm 49 now that the book's come out, and I'm 49. But I had I've hung around in London for long enough and made enough friends while I've been here that some of those are also writers, which is a massively helpful thing. Other writers are like such an incredible resource when you're taking your first steps into this. Like, I was always so intimidated by publishing, and I think without other people there saying, no, it's fine, honestly, no one knows what they're doing here either, it's great, like, jump on in, the water's fine, that really, really helped me. So I had really, really good friend Daisy Buchanan, who's a brilliant author too. Sorry, I've said she's a brilliant author too, like me. I don't mean it like that, I just mean she's an amazing author and my friend. But she was so encouraging and so sort of there if I felt wobbly. I think she and another friend, Marina O'Loughlin, who's a brilliant journalist, a food critic. Those were the two. It's funny, I'm not even sure if you know who these people are going to be until the time comes. But when I finally had to admit to myself that I needed to show the book to someone, so like the first draft or the second draft, perhaps, I don't think I showed anyone the first draft, it was terrible, that they were the two that I kind of went to. So in terms of like circle of trust, other writers, I was really lucky. And then that's maybe, once I was convinced that, they gave me some great edits and I did another draft, and then I probably felt a bit more confident to show other people. So then maybe a couple more friends, really good friend Steve Curran, who I've known since I was like 13. He then read it, and a couple of other friends too. But it's funny writing something so long form with no deadline, no one's asked you for it, no money's been, it literally is just for you. You're just doing it for yourself. That moment of realization when you've got to show it to someone else is like, oh no, it's just awful. And one of my friends, Beth Morrie, is an author too. She I think it was Beth saying, "Oh, you've got to join my scary writing group." And I was like, "I'm sorry, what?" It's like, "Yeah, it's a bunch of people and we just read stuff in." And I was like, "Absolutely not. Like, I can't think of anything." The thing you were saying about killing ideas stone dead with, but I think she finds that it's quite rigorous and quite sort of, it, keeps her on her toes. But I couldn't think of anything worse. So I had some very gentle friends who just held my hand. And yeah, when I was ready, they read it and sort of gave me. And actually, Daisy and Marina especially were just really good at just saying, right, this is good, don't understand this. Marina was the one who read a very early draft when I don't want to just like get into specifics in case I ruin the ending, but basically the ending that I very originally had back at the start, she was like, no, that's not going to work, that's going to leave me absolutely furious, you need to do something about that. And I was like, right, okay, got it. And so I took their advice really seriously, because they love reading apart from anything, so they weren't just really good writers, they're readers too.
It's always so heartening to realise that although writing is a lone pursuit,
yeah,
it doesn't have to feel that way all the time. And that support group around you is so important. And almost every author we've spoken to has that group. And that's why I like holding space on the podcast for people. They helped me. They
Honestly,
were in my team.
The acceptance speech. No, you've got to kind of, I think I probably realised quite late on in the process, as in I'd probably written a first draft before I realised some friends might be entirely up for reading the first dreadful thing that I came up with. And so I did feel incredibly lucky. And I was probably a bit shy to ask them at first, but once I did, it was like, okay, great, let's just do this. And obviously, while they were reading it, I sort of didn't want to know what they thought. But it was genuinely, that again changed the whole process from this very lonely thing to something that felt a bit more, if not collaborative, like just less scary, less lonely, less kind of,
less alone on these things.
It really did help.
Yeah, I can so imagine it. I really can. Because actually, how long did it take to write this book?
Oh God, bloody ages, if I can say that on your podcast.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it was just one of those things. The idea first really started kicking in 2019. And then obviously, this is like watching Grand Designs. You can see like 2020 March is coming up and all building work's going to have to stop. It was exactly like that. And but it did actually stop me for a while. So obviously I'm also a journalist. I'm trying to earn money while I'm doing this. I can't just sort of sit back and just do a novel for however many years, because it just, doesn't pay the bills, sadly. So around the time the pandemic hit, I don't think I had a first draft finished. So it's quite slow going. It was sort of like summer 2019. The following spring, obviously, everything went nuts. And I did find the creative part of my brain seized up for a while, while it was concentrating on panicking and like freaking out. But then eventually, I think when lockdowns just became a kind of fairly regular thing, I did just decide to go back to it. And actually, it was really nice. Around then, Daisy Buchanan had written this, we call it her mucky book. It was a really successful book called Insatiable. And she was it was a new direction for her. And she was like looking for people to read it. So she sent me like a Word document going, I'm really sorry, it's a Word document. I was like, no, I haven't been able to read. Like, I want to try and read something. And so I read her first or second draft of that. And that got me back into reading. And then with that, my brain came back again and I started writing again. So I had a lot to thank her for. I was like, one, I couldn't read and now I'm reading again, so thank you. And two, I think I'm going to pick my book up again. And that's sort of when it all started happening again. But it did still take me a long time because, I sold it in, what are we now, 2025? I sold it at the very beginning of 2024. So it's actually been weirdly quite quick, I think, selling a book in February and then it coming out the following February. It's been quite fast, I think, compared to some anyway.
I mean, I want to come back to some of your reading habits in a minute, because they have, again, a constant theme across the podcast of the different people's reading styles and how they use reading when they're writing or not. Avoid it. Sometimes has come up.
Yeah.
But just before we go onto that, I did want to talk about how two things really. I'd love to talk about how much you've discarded. Right. So we've had a running tally growing. I think David Hendy in the first episode talked about how he's abandoned 75,000 words in a 7-year project to write the history of the BBC.
Wow.
Holly then laughed and said, that's nothing. I've got rid of at least 100,000 words for fun.
Wow.
I think was approximately the quote.
Yeah.
What about yourself? Are you a big cutter or are you, mostly a use as much as is there?
think I wish I could say it was like something I could even really keep track of. I think the process was quite chaotic. So I had the first draft, someone persuaded me I needed to do it on Scrivener because that was really easy and you could just, it's so easy. And in some ways it was, although I completely pickled up how you're supposed to file everything. So I actually didn't find it that easy at all. And then I kind of just freaked out and just took everything off that and put it onto a Word document and then just did it on Word from there. And I think I'd be lying if I said I could remember. I don't think anything like 100,000 words, but I mean, I've definitely written whole chapters or even whole acts of the book and then just said, no, that won't work. Or, I mean, after Marina read it, the ending, just like so many changes. I didn't even, because writers do keep count a lot, don't they? But I think I was so sort of chaotic. I probably didn't. One of the questions people ask you when they've never written a book and you're like, oh, I've written a book. They're like, oh, how many words is it? And you're like, what? Well, what? Why do you? Okay, I'll just go and do a word count. Why do you want to know that? What a weird question. I always think so what's that going to give you? Like a sense of how heavy it will be, or what? So yeah, no, I'd be lying if I said I knew. Nothing like 100,000 words, but certainly probably some thousands. Yeah, you have to be. I think when something's not working, you just have to be honest with yourself. And I was, really keen to listen to other people because, it hadn't just been solitary. It'd been like in lockdown solitary, like really not having anyone to talk to about it for a long time. So I think once you open the floodgates and start asking people, I found myself just because I felt like I was a complete novice. I was a complete novice. I really wanted to listen to other people and see how you can't possibly tell how other people are going to receive it. You need to kind of listen to them and, get a good spread of opinions. And I think when something wasn't working, it just like no sentimentality, it just went.
Is there any of those scenes that you cut out of the book? Are there any of those that you sit there now and go, that would have been interesting to go to?
Yeah.
Can you share any of them? Again, it's a plot problem, perhaps. But...
No, because I might use it somewhere else because it was so good. But in the rom-com bit, I constructed this whole thing. This is why I love my editor so much, because she would just, from an 80, 90,000 word manuscript, would just see one thread that went all the way through the book and just say, if we just pull this, yank, suddenly everything's tighter, everything flows much more quickly. Can we just get rid of this one thing? So in the original book, there's a whole backstory about how Ali, my heroine, was born in Scotland, lived there for 10 years and then moved to England when she was 10. That's why she's always felt a bit out of place and she got teased about her accent, all that kind of stuff. And she was born in North Berwick, which I loved because it's where all the witch trials happen in Scotland. It was like a huge link with the past. And there was a whole scene based on Ed seducing Ali where one of the nights she goes to see him in a comedy club, he takes her to... There's a place called Cecil Sharp House in Camden. Do you know it? If you know London, it's basically the home of English folk music. It's a brilliant building. They have all kinds of wonderful events and concerts and stuff there, and they have an archive of folk music. It's beautiful. And they walk past Cecil Sharp House and they have things like Scottish ceilidhs and English folk dancing there. And so he takes her to listen, just like stand on the pavement and listen to some ceilidh music coming out, and there's like an open door and people are waltzing past the door, and I loved writing it. I loved everything about that scene. I was like, this is brilliant. And it's kind of like such a rom-com sort of, you'd be, if a guy did that for you, you'd just be knocked off your feet. You'd be so like, oh my god, he listened to what I said about being Scottish and missing home and blah blah blah, and and bang. And it was, I'd seeded it all the way through the book, and she was like, get rid of the Scottish thing, and I was like, but that means they can't go to... She was like, yeah, get rid of it. I was like, but because I loved it so much. But without it, you get to where we need to get much more quickly. And honestly, I realised the importance of that. If, writing the kind of book it turned out I was writing, which I didn't really know, I was just telling a story, the importance of it getting to where it needed to be in a pacey, page-turny sort of way was everything, I think. And I nothing could get in the way of that. So... yeah, sorry, the folk dancing went. But maybe in another book. I don't know. I was so in love with that scene.
But the shout out to the place is there. And I'm making my plans, as we know. It looks like I'm making notes here for the interview. I'm not. I'm just making plans for the evening.
No, get on their mailing list if you like folk music and you are ever in London. Like, it's the thing. I literally, a couple of weeks ago, they did, wassailing. So when you go and sort of, you go to the orchard and kind of sing a song to the trees and pour cider on the ground for a good harvest next year. Lots of places are reviving that tradition. They do it at Cecil Sharp House every year, and I went, and it was so lovely.
We need to figure out how they can do a book signing there or something like this.
I know. Yeah.
Moving on to the publishing. You mentioned earlier that the publishing journey for you has been relatively quick, I think, for something that has hit the mainstream as well as it has, perhaps.
Yeah.
Why was it so quick? Why was the publishing journey so potentially smooth, or wasn't it?
Well, I mean, I've got nothing to compare it to, honestly. Obviously, I've heard stories from friends and things, but I think it felt weirdly straightforward for me. I think my agent was really good because I never had to say this, but she just sussed out right from the beginning, really, that in a process where, you're out on submission, so your manuscript's gone out, she sent it to all the publishers that she thinks would be the most likely to buy it. The first round, I only found out it was called that later. While that was going on, she just, if I didn't ask, she didn't tell me. So if I was fine with complete radio silence, she'd just let that fly. And then if I kind of, after a couple of weeks would go, I'm sure the answer's no, but I just wondered if she'd kind of get some of the nice rejections and what they'd said and just say, they said they love this, they love that, but they have something similar, or blah, blah, the usual reasons you get no's, or the usual reasons you're given anyway. And I think then once the publisher bought it, because they're indie and, you're not kind of in a huge queue at HarperCollins or whatever to get to, the printing presses and the promotional stuff. I get why it takes a long time, but it must be like so frustrating. It's like, I've just signed a book deal. Yes, it's coming out in 2 years. It's just like, I think my head would have exploded. Like, I'm quite an excitable person anyway, so I feel really lucky that it was quick. But I think they just said, it needs to come out in the first half of the year. Apparently debuts better, early in the year. And just so there's a bit of room around them, basically. You're not fighting with like every huge book at Christmas. And they said, look, we can be fairly nimble if we move a few things around. Like, this makes perfect sense at this time of year, whatever. They just seem to have a plan. And so, the idea that it would be quick was like one of the main reasons why we were like, yes, please, because it just, it felt like they were very sort of single-minded, and they just said, look, we will be nimble about this because we're not trying to turn an oil rig around to get this book out. We can do it, within reason fairly quickly. So yeah, when I was told a year was quick, I was like, my jaw was on the floor, but obviously I was just grateful not to be waiting any longer than that, because that would have done my nut in.
And how was that? Because obviously you and I have extreme jealousy here, because you've got a beautiful hardback edition book of this.
So lovely.
And I am one of those people that likes to have the, I'm going to call it the dead trees on the shelf.
Yes, it's a horrible way of putting it. Lovely.
It's not poetic, but it's true. But when you were walking through, so this one I've got here that I literally bought it in St Pancras as I got on the Eurostar to head over, you see.
Yeah.
And it's been signed by you and everything, and it's so beautiful. You've been out doing book signings now, and you've been seeing your book on the shelf for a little while, but what was it like when you first saw it in the wild, when you first bumped into your book, and after all those years?
I mean, it wasn't, obviously you never really bump into it because you're always looking for it, right? But I have to say that the real moment for me, and there have been a few, like they make printed proofs, when you're kind of about halfway through that process of waiting for the book to come out, proofs go out to people to get them to, quote for the hardback. And that was a moment seeing it in any kind of book form. It's like a little paperback, but it was like, oh my God, it's a book. But I think I literally did like the Charlie and the Chocolate Factory thing. I got to go to the printers and I watched my book roll off the presses. And so the point in the process where there's like a bound, bunch of paper, and then the hard cardboard bits covered in, I've discovered it's called wibbling, that kind of tight cloth binding. It's wibbling. It's not a real word. For ages I thought they were taking the piss. I was like, what's it really called? They were like, no, honestly, it's a wibbling. I was like, okay, sure, whatever. And then the kind of the actual glossy paper cover that goes over the hardback, and I watched it all being put together, and then I got to pick up the first one off the conveyor belt. That was genuinely so emotional, like incredibly emotional. And I was trying not to, and I had like, it's really cheesy but wonderful, I had like a high-vis tabard on that said author on the back.
I believe I've seen that photo.
I mean, it's a dream come true. And they do this for lots of authors, who want to come and see their book being printed. So they make a whole theatre of it. It's so lovely. It's such like that felt like winning a prize or the Make-A-Wish Foundation or something. It was just amazing. And it's because the book is dedicated to my brother and my dad, and we lost them both in like 2018 and 2016. Just had been through such catastrophically awful times, my family, and then to kind of see their names in the front. Oh, it was just, I mean, I was a mess. And then to see it in shops was like, I mean, it was amazing, but like, wow, you can't really top seeing it roll towards you on a conveyor belt, and then like thousands more coming. It was just incredible.
I honestly, that experience, I know it's one could argue it's a shallower part of the writing journey, but
no.
I don't think so either. Although I will have to share a little funny story with you. So I've just looked at, so for Colin and Jim Raeside, that's wonderful to see in your dedications. I did a dedication for my first book, which by the way is nowhere near as impressive as yours, which was to my best friend Mike Signs, who had passed away when we were both 20.
Oh my God, that's horrible.
It was very difficult, but just I know Mike is smiling. So Mike and he always had a great sense of humour, Mike, and he would like the fact that I actually got the wrong year of his passing.
Just a little in-joke between you two guys.
It got worse. I gave the first print edition to his mum, and she was the one who told me I got the wrong day.
My goodness.
Fortunately, she did see the funny side.
I mean, you would, wouldn't you? I mean, it's what a nice thing to, you know, all these years later to remember him. But yeah, it's, oh God. That I had nightmares about that. What if I get something? What if something's wrong? Like in the acknowledgements, what if someone's wrong or the name's wrong? Or, the sleepless nights.
You proofread the acknowledgements perhaps more than the rest of the book sometimes.
Cripes, yes, absolutely. Yeah. And on my launch party, so I've got a friend called Tom Price, he's a radio DJ, but he also does stand-up. And it was so long ago that he'd actually forgotten, but he gave me, when I first wrote the first chapter, which is in a comedy club, I stupidly realised, I'm going to have to write some stand-up comedy. I don't know how to do that. So I was kind of asking him advice, and actually none of it ended up in the book in the end, but he gave me some really great pointers on like how crowd work works and all that kind of stuff. And so when he got to the book launch, his wife Beth Morrie, who'd helped massively during the making of the book, was really cheesed off, and he was triumphant because his name was before hers in the acknowledgements, and she was absolutely disgusted, and he was just like punching the air. It was quite unseemly. And so you have to really think about the order you're putting people in. Like, it's a lot to think about.
It's a bit like an early Oscar speech, right?
Yeah.
It's an early acceptance
completely.
Speech.
Yeah, I saw it very much like that.
So departing from your books just for a moment and your writing process and your experience with writing, reading, finding time to read and using reading as maybe a tool in part of your writing life now. How does it fit in for you? What does reading mean to you when you're now operating as a successful novelist and perhaps writing the next one? Who knows?
Who are you talking about? Somebody else. Massively important. As mentioned, the whole lockdown thing and my brain just sort of turning into a, terrified jelly for a few months. Reading is what brought me back to writing. And then I think pretty much, in the summer of 2020, when it all got going again, I found myself just wanting to read lots more. But then finding I was incredibly porous. So like, obviously what I've written is, like I said, accessible, broadly readable kind of commercial fiction. Somebody had recommended Nisha Dolan. I think it was Exciting Times that had just come out that year. So it's sort of like very cool, introspective, Irish. She's like another Sally Rooney, effectively, although I'm sure she hates that description. But their writing styles and backstories aren't a million miles apart. So obviously I massively badly lumped them together in my head. But it's very minimalist. It doesn't really end. It's incredibly literary fiction. And then I loved how spare it was. And then I realised, looking at the things I was writing around the time I was reading it, I was like, that doesn't sound like you. And I was just expunging it up. And then, so I then realised I had to be careful of what I was reading. And I didn't stop reading, but I think I just chose stuff that maybe wasn't quite such a strong flavour, because I do it with accents as well. I'm one of those dreadful people who, if I'm in a different part, because I lived in quite a few different places growing up, and when I'm in a new place, the accent starts to creep into mine. It's like, I'm so embarrassed. I'm so sorry. I'm not taking the piss. I don't know why my brain does this. But I sponge stuff up. So I read stuff then with slightly less strong flavour. The other book that massively influenced me when I was writing this, although it's sort of, you probably couldn't tell from reading my book, but the writing and the kind of just the brilliance and the economy is a book by Katie Wicks called Delicacy, which is a kind of memoir, I suppose, about sort of, I mean, I won't make it sound in any way as good as it is because it's really hard to describe, but it's Katie Wicks plays Mary in Ghosts, the BBC sitcom, and she's in Big Boy. She's in loads of TV shows. She's an absolute genius. And it turns out an immensely talented writer. And there was something about that book that absolutely just caught me, because it's the kind of writing that I think I admire most, where you just so much is conveyed with so little. And it's not sort of self-consciously, minimalistic, but she always finds the right groupings of like very few words to like just create such images. And yeah, I'm completely... In fact, I've realised I looked for it on the shelf the other day and realised I think I've lent it to someone. They quite rightly didn't give it back to me, so I've just bought it again because it's just one of those books I think I want to go back to. I never used to believe people on book podcasts who said, "Oh, I read Jane Eyre every year," but I would read Delicacy every year. It's just extraordinary, and not even in the same genre that I was writing in, but. Yeah, there are some books that really fire me up, I think, and make my writing better. And then there are some books I've learned I shouldn't read if I'm trying to write my own stuff, because I might try and, I don't know, be them. And that doesn't really work. Yeah.
I love the phrase, it's too spicy, it's too hot. The food's too hot for me to go ahead and cook my own meals.
It's like everything starts to taste of it. Yeah, exactly, exactly. You got to clean your palate with something a bit, not blander, but like less kind of specific. Yeah.
And then finding inspiration, even in writing, that you look at and go, I don't think I can do that. I don't think I can write like that yet.
Yeah.
But it still, by some sort of little osmosis, gives you a kick in that direction sometimes. And
that does help. Yeah. I never had that thing where I read something and it was just so good. I know I can't write like Nora Ephron, but it doesn't mean I can't get something out of her writing and use in my own writing practice. Absolutely. Yeah, for sure.
Fabulous. Yeah, that's exactly what, just again, a little story that what I do as well when I'm writing. Now, I write technical books that are nowhere near as interesting or fascinating as what you've written. But over time, I've realised that I can use the spice to my best advantage.
Yeah, for sure.
So I'll read, if I want to sound intelligent, I'll read Hitchens. If I want to sound perhaps pretentious, if I want to write actually really direct and not give it too much fuss, I'll read Anthony Bourdain or something like that. It'll give me something. I can't write like that, but it gives me a little bit of guardrails, maybe.
Yeah, no, I know what you mean. It just sort of reminds you what you liked about that writing, and then you try and aim for it in your own or something. It just does help, I think. Yeah, for sure.
So what are you looking forward to reading this year? Is there anything out there you're like, I can't wait for that to be out?
Well, the really nice thing about being a new author is that sometimes people will start to send you books. So the book I've been looking forward to most, because I think I heard about it after mine was announced, and it was like, oh my gosh, like it almost sort of we're on a similar track but sort of parallel tracks, is a writer called Charlotte Runcie. So I would have been looking forward to this, but now I've read it because I got sent it, because I basically just made a nuisance of myself until she sent it to me. But yeah, Charlotte Runcie, and it's a book called Bring the House Down, and it's out in beginning of June this year. And it's a novel. It's absolutely brilliant. I mean, she writes like a dream, but it's leaning towards the literary, but just a complete page turner. And it's set at the Edinburgh Festival too, but it's not really about comedy. It's about sort of arts criticism. So she's an arts journalist too, Charlotte. She writes about this character who's effectively narrating somebody else's story, and she's living in a flat in Edinburgh, working for a newspaper for the month of the festival, sending back reviews to her editor. And she's there with this notorious arts critic who is, sort of very flamboyant, and he loves giving things 1 star and ruining careers. And he ruins the career of this new actress or comedian, wherever, at the Edinburgh Festival. Her one-woman show, he gives it 1 star, and then he meets her in a bar. And he knows exactly who she is, but the review hasn't been published yet. So he goes home with her and has sex with her. And then the next day she realises who he is and what he's done, and he's just ruined her career. And so she changes her whole Edinburgh show to kind of be basically a 1 star review of him, and draws in his ex-girlfriends, and it beams around the world on the internet. It's a brilliant, such a brilliant idea. And she explores so many different things in it. It's just some of the best fun I've had reading a book in a long time. It's just a brilliant story, and her prose is delicious. So I would say that, but I've already read it.
I mean, it is so much fun to interview people like yourself, to chat to people like yourself, because the joy comes across for what you're reading.
Yeah.
And for these scenes you're experiencing, even when you haven't written the scene, you're like, this is incredible, this is exciting, this is fun.
Very much,
And that seems to be a common theme. I'm not meeting many people in writing that don't have that same, this is really exciting, this is joyous, this is fun. which is so much in contrast to sort of the stereotypical writer. I think I joked with Holly of, a glass of absinthe in a cafe somewhere bleeding onto their notepad or
Right.
something.
Yeah. I know writers who, and they're men, let's face it, there's not women who still think that's how you write, in inverted, in quote marks. And it's just, it makes me laugh. It really does. They think they're like Bukowski or something, and they're there like pouring their, sort of opening a vein onto the page. Like, no. Come on. It's a job. It's a practice. Do it properly. Stop mucking about. You're not a kid, Yeah, that's not how you write. That's silly.
That's the soundbite right there. That's it.
Yeah. I really remember, long before I ever thought I'd write a book, watching one of those like BBC Two documentaries. It must have been like in the 90s. And it was about Minette Walters and how she writes a book. It's kind of like that Monty Python sketch, like live novel writing from Wessex, but like they really did it. And I was like, how's this going to be? And honestly, it looked so much fun, but like really unhealthy. She had like a huge glass of white wine, always by the computer, an overflowing ashtray, one fag after another. I was like, that looks amazing. I want to do that. Turns out if you do that, you'll be dead.
You might write something.
Yeah. Maybe if I wanted to try something out, I'd have like a glass of wine just to kind of loosen up a bit. But honestly, none of it was written with a cigarette holder and a martini. I wish that it was, but it wasn't. No.
But it could be good for the author photo. That's
amazing. Yeah. No, that was Vito, the cigarette holder. I don't know why. I'd have looked fabulous.
So I feel so sad. I have two last questions, and I've loved chatting to you, and I can't wait. I hope we can invite you back to the podcast.
Oh, yeah.
As future books come out. And
fingers crossed.
Maybe when you get the options on the TV show. I know I'm not supposed to ask those sorts of questions when things are happening, but I can't wait till when it does happen, because your book is crying out for it. Let's be honest.
Thank you.
But yes, so two last questions. They're becoming our regular questions.
Yeah.
The first one is there any question that you haven't been asked in all of the conversations you've had around your book, and maybe about your writing career? Is there a question you'd wish someone would have asked you that no one has done? And what would the answer be?
Well, actually, why would they? But no one's asked me when writing first, kind of like, was there anybody who made me think I could be a writer? And it's a really sweet story, actually. So I was lucky. I did have that one teacher for a good few years. So around sort of GCSE English, I had this brilliant teacher called Sarah Sapel, and I still don't know what she was doing like in a comprehensive in Warwick, but she was a doctor of Shakespeare. Like, she was the real deal. She was like one of the foremost, sources of knowledge on William Shakespeare. She was incredible. And obviously we were down the road from Stratford-on-Avon, so she'd encouraged me to go to the theatre, and she could see I was really into it. And only a few years ago now, maybe like 4 or 5 years ago, just before the pandemic, I suddenly remembered her and thought, I wonder what she's doing. She must be still knocking around somewhere. And I sent a letter managed to find her an address through, I think the church she went to or something had her on the parish news. I sent her a letter and then didn't hear anything back. And then about a month later, this kind of beautiful pressed like envelope, with a paper with sort of like flowers pressed into it, arrived with very scratchy handwriting. I was like, oh my God, I recognise the handwriting. Hasn't got any better. And it was lovely. And it was her just saying that she'd read my letter and she didn't realise I'd gone on to be a writer. And it was just, I was in floods of tears, and I think I posted it on Twitter with a kind of typed out next to it because her writing was so bad. Sorry, but it was terrible. I was so glad. And she was just like, oh, I woke up the next morning and thought your letter had been a dream. Thank you so much. It's so nice. As teachers, you never hear this. And then I wrote back to her again, and I think she'd passed away. She was very poorly at the time, I think. And it was so kind of like, oh, I got to tell her. And I'm sure lots of other people did too, because she was one of those incredible teachers. Without her, I wouldn't have even tried writing, I don't think. So yeah, there you go. Dr. Sarah Sapel. What a woman.
Fantastic. That's so beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. That's awesome. That's got a tear in my eye, to be honest. Aww. So, actually, part of the reason for that is in the festival, we're doing an awful lot of work with the local schools.
Amazing.
And the local colleges to make it as tuned for them as possible.
Yeah.
And the hope and the dream is that in a few years' time, someone's coming along to the festival that's like yourself, writing incredibly well, doing beautiful work, and maybe getting a chance to say thank you to their inspiring teacher or their inspiring person.
That's where it starts, unquestionably. That somebody plants the seed or someone says, you can do this, or I've noticed you're good at this, and it just changes everything. Yeah, for sure.
Certainly what we're trying to do with this festival. It's our mission. It's become our mission.
Yeah, it's amazing. Good for you.
Thank you. Thank you. It keeps us going.
Yeah, absolutely.
The very last question, Julia, and it is sad to end it, but the last question is, if you could go back in time to yourself, either right at the beginning or at a time maybe when it was difficult, and you could give yourself some spirit with a bit of advice or maybe even just a sentence, what would that have been? What would you have said to yourself at that moment?
I think probably I'd go back to me at school, because I really, even with her encouragement and stuff, I suppose didn't come from the sort of family where it was like, oh, writing could be a job. Like it was not even a question. If you were good at English, the careers advisor would say, be a teacher, like next. There was no advice. It was just woman English, right? Yes, teacher, you can teach. So I was completely lost on leaving school and sort of went to university and just did, film and English because I liked them, and that was great. But I still didn't really know what to do. Writing didn't even happen then. Then I worked in TV for a bit and was like, why am I not enjoying this? And it's really kind of cutthroat and a bit sort of like, you have to have really thick skin to work in telly. So it took me then like another few years. And I think I'd go back now and tell maybe 16-year-old me, like, don't wait for someone to ask you. And this is a job. Go and find out how you could do this for a job, even if it's just, copywriting, or be a journalist or do something. But for some reason it didn't occur to me back then, and I do feel like I wasted quite a lot of time doing things I didn't really enjoy. And I think I wouldn't change anything else about how it's all played out, actually, but it was always writing, but for some reason I didn't do that for a job until quite late on. So I would just go back and tell her, don't wait for someone to ask you, and have a bit of confidence because you can do this. That's what I would say. I think I probably just didn't know that I was all right at it until a lot further down the line. And then a really good friend. So when I moved to London, I was working in TV, and I was emailing him a lot saying, I can't stand my job and my bosses are awful and everyone in TV's mean. And I mean, they weren't, but the company I was at the time, dreadful. And he kept writing back and saying, your emails are really funny. What about writing? And I was like, oh, no. And then eventually he just said, look, for God's sake, it's staring you in the face. Do you want me to help you? Because he was writing some stuff for The Guardian at the time as a freelancer. And then once he'd done that, I sort of realised maybe it was an option. And so without Dr. Sarah Sapel and without Ali Catterall, who's still my very good friend to this day, I wouldn't have done it, I think. And I think I'd go back and tell young me, don't wait for someone to tell you and ask you. Just like, it's writing, get on with it. I wish.
The beauty of hindsight. Yes, absolutely.
I know.
Oh, that's fantastic. Julia, thank you so much for taking the time to meet our hopefully growing audience for the podcast, and please keep writing books that are anything like the wonder that you produced this time.
Thank you.
And I hope we can find a way to entice you to Eastbourne in the next year or two.
Yeah, I've got some really good friends who live in Eastbourne, and in fact they run a comedy night down there. So obviously I've got reasons to come already, but like add a festival to that and I'm there. I love Eastbourne. It's great.
Oh, fantastic. Well, the invite is yours. Just let us know what your busy schedule looks like when you're, on the red carpet in a year or so's time.
think maybe, okay, sure, yeah, I'm on a red carpet. I'm on one right now.
I didn't say where the red carpet was or shape or size.
I just have one permanently under my shoes now. It makes me feel, like I've achieved something.
Manifest. Oh, it's so wonderful to talk to you, Julia. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast, and I hope we get to speak to you again soon. And good luck with the continued promotion of your brilliant book, Don't Make Me Laugh.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, for listening to the Eastbourne Literary Festival's podcast. We'll be trying to put out an episode like this relatively regularly as we get used to doing it. Thanks for hanging in there with us. If you'd like to be involved in the festival or in any way would like to show your support for it, please visit eastbourneliteraryfestival.com. The links will be going out with the podcast episode, as will all. Me and the team are always looking for new folks to get involved as we bring this hopefully incredible festival to life.